May 15, 1943, the Philippine Sea, 120 miles northeast of the Mariana Islands. Commander Minoru Endō grips the periscope handles of his I-class submarine, I-16, as the vessel slides through darkness like a predator stalking prey. Around him, the control room hums with the steady rhythm of diesel engines running at silent speed. 23 men crew this steel tube, men who have spent 3 years of war believing the Pacific belonged to them. They've sunk merchant vessels, harassed American supply lines, and returned to port with stories of unopposed hunting. But tonight something feels different. Above the surface, an American task force cuts through the water 18 miles away. The convoy carries ammunition, food and fuel for island garrisons. Endō has orders to intercept it. He's done this dozens of times. Surface at night, fire torpedoes, dive, escape. The formula has served the Imperial Japanese Navy well. What Endō doesn't know, what no Japanese submarine commander knows yet, is that the rules of the hunt have fundamentally changed. On the bridge of the USS Reuben James, a Fletcher-class destroyer, Lieutenant Commander Herbert McCall stands with binoculars around his neck, watching the horizon. Behind him, in the Combat Information Center deep within the ship's hull, sonar operator second-class Thomas Reeves sits before a glowing circular screen, a newfangled piece of equipment that arrived stateside just months ago. The device is called active sonar, a refinement of the British technology that American engineers have been perfecting since 1941. Instead of simply listening to the water like the old passive hydrophones, this system sends out pulses of sound and listens for the echoes bouncing back. At 22:47 hours, the blip appears on Reeves's screen. It's faint, unmistakable. A contact bearing 045 degrees, approximately 5 miles out. His hands move instinctively, checking the settings, verifying the range. He picks up the telephone to the bridge. Sonar contact! His voice crackles through the speaker. Bearing 045 degrees, distance approximately 5 miles. Bearing steady. McCall's jaw tightens. 5 miles. In the darkness, that submarine believes itself invisible. It believes it has time. The destroyer captain has spent months training his crew on this new equipment. They've run drills, practiced approach vectors, rehearsed the protocols. But this is the first time he'll use it against a real enemy. He reaches for the general quarters alarm. The ship convulses with the sound, a sound Japanese submariners have learned to fear. Below the surface, I-16's hydrophone operators hear it first. Not the alarm itself, but the unmistakable signature of an American destroyer powering toward them. Endō's eyes snap from the periscope. His mouth tightens. How? The American ships are still miles away. There's been no attack, no depth charges. How do they know? The answer, advanced sonar operating at ranges that Japanese technology cannot match, will change submarine warfare forever. Endō's mind races through possibilities as I-16 shudders from the vibrations of the destroyer's approaching screws. For 3 years, Japanese submarines have operated with near impunity in these waters. The Americans had old destroyers, older tactics, and no way to see beneath the surface. A submarine's greatest weapon was invisibility. That invisibility is now gone. Dive, Endō commands, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. All hands, emergency descent. Take us to 250 meters. The submarine tilts sharply downward. Ballast tanks flood. The crew moves with practiced efficiency. Men who have executed this maneuver hundreds of times during peacetime exercises and actual combat. But the atmosphere in the control room has changed. Something in their commander's tone tells them this is different. This is fear. Topside, McCall has already plotted an intercept course. The USS Reuben James accelerates to 20 knots, her bow cutting through the dark Pacific. In the Combat Information Center, Reeves watches the sonar contact descend. The pings continue, relentless, painting the picture of a submarine diving for safety. Depth 150 meters, Reeves reports. Still descending. Contact steady on bearing 045 inches. McCall makes his decision. All stop. Come about to bearing 045. Prepare depth charges. Set for 300 feet. What McCall knows and what Endō is about to discover in the most terrifying way possible is that sonar doesn't care about depth. The sound waves that the USS Reuben James is transmitting cut through water with brutal efficiency. They find I-16 as she sinks deeper, as Endō desperately hoping the submarine will slip below detection range. But there is no such range. Not anymore. In the Japanese submarine, the crew hears the sound, a rhythmic pinging that seems to come from everywhere at once, as if the ocean itself has turned against them. Senior petty officers exchange glances. This is not the sound of a ship passing overhead. This is something hunting them with mechanical precision. Bearing unchanged, Endō's executive officer reports. The destroyer maintains contact. The realization hits like a physical blow. The American is not guessing. The American is not searching. The American knows. At 23:04 hours, the first pattern of depth charges tumbles from the stern of the USS Reuben James. The explosions are apocalyptic. Underwater depth charges don't whisper. They scream. The blast waves slam into a 16's hull like sledgehammers wielded by giants. Light fixtures shatter. Men are thrown against steel bulkheads. One sailor's arm fractures with an audible crack. The submarine lurches, then stabilizes as Endō fights for control. Damage report, he demands, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hull breach in the aft torpedo room. We're taking water, sealing the compartment now. Another series of explosions. The submarine twists again. A pipe ruptures in the forward compartment, spraying steam. The temperature in the control room climbs. A young ensign, barely 20 years old, presses his back against the wall, eyes wide, realizing that the invulnerability he's known for 3 years has been an illusion. McCall, standing on the bridge of the Reuben James, hears nothing of this. To him, it is clinical. The sonar shows the contact stationary, wounded, dying. He orders another pattern, then another. By the time the fourth pattern detonates, I-16 is finished. The hull fractures. Seawater rushes in. In the darkness of the control room, Endō understands the truth. The war beneath the waves has entered a new age, and Japan has not kept pace. At 23:18 hours, I-16 sinks. Of her crew of 76 men, only 9 survive. News of I-16's loss reaches Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's headquarters 3 days later. The report is fragmented. Salvage ships found debris, oil slicks, the grim flotsam of a destroyed warship. But the manner of her destruction troubles the Japanese high command far more than the loss itself. I-16 had reported no enemy contact. She had transmitted no distress signal, indicating she'd been spotted by conventional means. She had simply vanished under attack from a destroyer that seemed to know her exact position in the vast Pacific darkness. The only rational explanation terrified everyone who heard it. The Americans possessed detection technology that rendered submarines vulnerable at distances where Japanese sonar could not even perceive the enemy ships. Commander Shoji Nishina, captain of I-19, receives a dispatch ordering him to return to port immediately for an urgent briefing. When he arrives at the naval base in Rabaul, he finds himself in a conference room with a dozen other submarine commanders and fleet officers. An intelligence officer stands before a map, pointing to contact reports now flooding in from submarine captains across the Pacific. Between May and July of this year, the officer says, his voice hollow, we have lost 7 submarines to American destroyers. In each case, the destroyers achieved contact at ranges of 5 to 7 miles in darkness. In each case, our crews reported no warning until depth charges were already detonating around them. We have concluded that the Americans possess active sonar systems operating at unprecedented ranges. The room falls silent. Nishina feels his stomach tighten. Active sonar. The technology exists in theory. The British have experimented with it, but to have perfected it, integrated it into their destroyer fleet, and deployed it across the Pacific while Japanese intelligence remained ignorant. The implications are staggering. One captain speaks up. What are our countermeasures? The intelligence officer hesitates, a hesitation that speaks volumes. We are developing evasion tactics, operating at greater depths, using decoys. But the fundamental problem remains: we cannot detect the sonar emissions at the same range the Americans can detect us. What the officer doesn't say, what no one in that room wants to admit, is that the Japanese submarine force has suddenly become obsolete. For 3 years, Japanese I-class submarines have ranged across the Pacific virtually unopposed. They've sunk destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers. They've harassed American supply lines and terrorized merchant convoys. But that era is ending, not with a dramatic battle, but with a technological revelation. Aboard submarines throughout the Pacific, the shock manifests in different ways. Some captains become reckless, attempting to fight their way through American destroyer screens. Others become paralyzed by caution, spending so much time evading detection that they never reach their targets. A few, the best and bravest, attempt to adapt, learning new tactics, pushing their boats deeper, moving slower, anything to survive contact with American destroyers. But none of these adaptations can overcome the fundamental truth: the Americans can see them coming. By August 1943, Japanese submarine losses accelerate. I-10, I-17, I-26, I-30. The roll call of the dead grows longer. Each loss carries the same pattern. Destroyed by American destroyers that seem to materialize from darkness with perfect knowledge of their prey's location. Each loss costs Japan irreplaceable trained crews and cutting-edge vessels, and each loss sends a message through the submarine service. The Pacific has become a hunting ground, and the hunters have evolved. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff begins to grasp the magnitude of the crisis. Sonar technology has shifted the balance of undersea warfare. The submarines that were meant to be Japan's silent assassins have become victims in a game where the Americans possess all the advantages. Production of new I-class submarines continues, but everyone knows the truth. Sending these boats to sea is increasingly a death sentence. By October 1943, the Japanese submarine force has been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Losses mount faster than replacements can be built. The crews that survive are exhausted, traumatized, operating under the crushing weight of knowing that every patrol is likely their last. The pride that characterized the submarine service in 1941, when Japanese boats roamed unchallenged, has evaporated, replaced by grim fatalism. Commander Takeo Kurita receives orders to take his new submarine, I-37, on a patrol mission near the Solomon Islands. He knows what awaits him. Every captain knows. The waters are no longer neutral territory, where a skilled commander with a good boat might achieve glory. They are a graveyard. But Kurita accepts the mission because refusal is unthinkable in the Japanese Navy. Officers do their duty, even unto death. I-37 departs on October 28th. 4 days later, the USS Eaton, a Fletcher-class destroyer equipped with the latest sonar systems, detects her at 5 miles distance. The pattern repeats. The destroyer closes on the contact with methodical precision. The submarine attempts to dive and evade. The depth charges fall. The hull fractures. The boat sinks. Kurita and 68 of his crew perish in the darkness. Back at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz reviews the casualty reports with grim satisfaction. The introduction of active sonar to the Pacific Fleet has transformed the naval war in America's favour. What was once a dangerous, unpredictable threat, Japanese submarines appearing from nowhere, has become a manageable problem. American destroyers, equipped with superior technology and operated by well-trained crews, have seized control of the submarine war. The technological advantage is so complete that by late 1943, Japanese submarine operations in the Central Pacific have become increasingly futile. Captains are ordered to operate at night on the surface, which requires them to dive and hide during daylight hours, the very behaviour that makes them vulnerable to sonar detection. It is a tactical paradox with no solution. Advance toward the enemy, and the sonar finds you. Hide, and you cannot fight. In desperation, the Japanese Navy attempts to develop countermeasures. Scientists propose acoustic decoys. Engineers design rubber coatings for submarine hulls to absorb sonar pulses. Naval planners suggest operating in shallower waters where sonar might be less effective. None of these measures prove adequate. The fundamental problem remains: American sonar technology has advanced beyond anything the Japanese can counter or replicate. More troubling for Tokyo is the realization that this is not an isolated advantage, but the beginning of a trend. If the Americans have perfected active sonar, what other technologies might they be developing? What other invisible advantages might be arrayed against Japanese forces across the Pacific? The answer, though the Japanese do not yet know it, includes advanced radar systems, superior radio direction finding equipment, and an intelligence capability derived from breaking Japanese naval codes. The technological gap between the American and Japanese militaries is widening, and the submarine force is bearing the brunt of this disparity. By the end of 1943, Japanese submarine losses have reached catastrophic levels. 44 submarines have been lost in the Pacific theatre since May, more than half the force available at the beginning of the year. The crews are irreplaceable. The boats take months to build. The morale has collapsed. What began as a war of dominance beneath the waves has become a massacre. Commander Endō Minoru, if he had survived I-16's destruction, would recognise in these losses the harbinger of defeat. The submarines that once ranged freely across the Pacific, that once seemed an unstoppable force, have been neutralised by a technology their nation could not anticipate or counter. The shock of that realisation ripples through the Japanese Navy as 1943 turns to 1944, changing forever the calculus of undersea warfare and accelerating Japan's path toward ultimate defeat.